They didn't save me a seat. Not one of them. I stood there, heels aching, clutching my coat, while 10 perfectly set places laughed around a table that had no room for me. Emily looked up from her wine and gave that rehearsed charity gala smile. "Oh, you made it," she said. "We weren't sure, given your schedule." Her dress shimmered under the chandelier. Gold, tasteful, expensive. Mine was navy blue. Pressed but plain. I'd worn it once to a memorial. The server offered me a chair from another table. It wobbled. I sat anyway. Someone passed bread. No one passed me a word. I caught my mother's voice as she leaned across to brag about Emily's nonprofit, nominated for a regional leadership award. She beamed. Then she added like punctuation. "And she's never left home." The subtext stung more than anything I'd seen in war zones. What they meant was I left St. Louis. Left after the divorce. Left after the custody hearing where emotional instability due to occupational trauma became the reason I lost my son. No one fought for me. They just adjusted. And now 6 years later here I was squeezed in beside the kitchen doors, invisible in plain sight. Aunt Lydia leaned over her crab cake. "So, Karen, are you still patching folks up somewhere overseas?" I looked at her silver bracelet. It clinked softly as she cut into shrimp. I remembered when I'd cleaned blood off a girl the same age as her granddaughter after an earthquake took down her entire school. But none of that belonged here. Here I was, the woman who left. The one who lost. The one who wasn't built for family. I didn't answer. Just reached for my water glass empty. My hands still carried the muscle memory of triage. I could feel the phantom pressure of latex gloves. My sister's voice rang again. "We really should toast to everyone who stayed. Who held this family together." They raised glasses. My mother looked down the table, pausing just before my face. Then kept moving. That moment, it wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It just cut deep and quiet. And yet something inside me stayed still. Clear, ready. Because I knew something none of them did. And someone else in this city hadn't forgotten. Would you speak up or let them keep writing your story for you? Have you ever been erased by the people who claim to love you? Tell me where you're listening from. Your voice matters. This story isn't about revenge. It's about remembering who I am. 6 years is a long time to disappear. Long enough for the city skyline to change. Long enough for my son's voice to deepen. Long enough for a family to forget where you sat at the table. But my old apartment hadn't changed. Same chipped banister. Same smell of old carpet and lemon cleaner. I rented it, furnished, something temporary. There was still a calendar pinned to the fridge from 2018. The photo was of a lake in Minnesota, frozen blue. I stared at it for a long time that first morning back. I had nowhere else to be. The hospital I used to work at had long replaced me. They sent a generic "thank you for your service" email when I declined reappointment. The army gave me silence, which was somehow easier to live with. I unpacked slowly. The field knife went to the back of the drawer. The commendation letter went into a folder labeled "Misc." The last thing I placed was a small photo of Liam, taken the day he got his braces off. He was smiling with one front tooth still crooked. The version of him I still held onto. I hadn't seen him in person since his 16th birthday. He stopped replying to emails when his father moved to Denver. Said it was too hard. Said I made everything feel complicated. I didn't blame him, not out loud. At 10:00 a.m., I walked down to the diner at the corner. Griddle smoke and burnt coffee beans hit me at the door. The waitress didn't recognize me. Neither did the owner. I used to come here after night shifts. Used to sit in the third booth, far end, black coffee and rye toast. The booth was still there, but someone else sat in it now, scrolling a phone, chewing gum. I picked a stool at the counter. "Just coffee," I said. "No cream." The cup clattered when she set it down. I wrapped both hands around it anyway. The warmth helped. In the booth behind me, 2 women were talking about Emily. "You know she's getting the Magnolia Award this year," one said. "She's on every billboard." Her face is literally on the side of the library. I didn't turn around, I just sipped slowly. That's how it was now. Emily was the one who stayed. The one who rebuilt the family name after the messy divorce, the mental strain, the combat trauma. I was the chapter they closed without reading. Back at the apartment, the voicemail light blinked once. It was my mother. Her voice was flat polite. "Dinner's at 7 Magnolia Oak private room. Don't be late." "No, how are you?" "No, we're glad you're home. Just logistics." I stared at the blinking red light for a while, then deleted the message. At 5:30 sharp, I zipped up the same navy dress. It was clean, pressed. Still hung with the scent of the cedar sachets I kept in storage boxes overseas. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The lines were deeper now, the hair shorter, threaded with silver. But my eyes looked the same. The cab ride to the restaurant was quiet. The driver made small talk about a local parade. I nodded, smiled, didn't really listen. Inside Magnolia Oak, everything was polished to a fault. Brass railings. Crisp white linens. Wine bottles so expensive they didn't list the prices. The hostess led me to the long table tucked in the back. 12 seats. 11 filled. I took the 12th. No one moved. Emily stood. Her arms opened theatrically. "Karen," she said, like I was a surprise guest. "Then you made it after all." I nodded once. Didn't bother to respond. The chair wobbled slightly when I sat. Dinner passed in snapshots. My uncle misremembering my rank. My cousin asking if I still had those PTSD dreams. Emily talking over me when I tried to explain I'd been in South Sudan, not Germany. My mother waving it off. "Oh, she's always moving around. Hard to keep track." No one asked what I did. Or why I left. They just filled the air with Emily's accolades. Every sentence felt like a correction. Every compliment a subtle redirection. I noticed my picture wasn't in the slideshow on the wall, but Emily was. Over and over again. From high school to fundraisers to last month's gala. All polished. All perfect. Not one frame showed me in uniform, not even the ceremony at Fort Hood, the one where I was pinned. The food tasted fine. I barely chewed. At one point my mother reached over and adjusted the bread basket. "You're not eating," she said. I shrugged. "Not hungry," I replied. "Still don't eat red meat, do you?" she asked like it was a flaw. She forgot I stopped because of the stomach wound. 3 surgeries, and still she couldn't remember. I looked at Emily. She was glowing. Gowned, admired. She caught me watching and gave a quick smile. Something cold behind her eyes. That night I walked back to my apartment alone. The streetlights flickered like they always had. The cold bit through my coat. The wind smelled like wet brick and fried oil. I passed a storefront with old trophies in the window. One said Leadership Award, 2009. The glass was cracked. I paused. Looked at my reflection. Then kept walking. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. But I knew. Something had shifted. I didn't sleep that night. The hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence. A pipe knocked somewhere behind the wall. I laid still, eyes open, watching the blinking red of the smoke detector. Somewhere across the city my family was sleeping peacefully, probably talking about how cold I'd been. How I always took things too seriously. I reached for my phone. Still no messages. Not from Liam. Not from anyone. I opened an old folder of photos. Field shots. A tent hospital lit by kerosene lamps. A nurse from Kenya who braided my hair during monsoon season. The blurred outline of my own boots in red sand. I zoomed in on one image, Marcus and I standing beside a medevac chopper, helmets off, sunburnt. He'd been the one to tell me, "Don't let them rewrite you." I didn't listen. The next morning, I walked downtown to clear my head. Magnolia Ridge wasn't big, but it pretended to be. Every corner was lined with banners of community renewal. Emily's face smiled from 2 of them. The library. The post office. She wore a navy blazer with a white blouse, like someone who'd never needed to scrub blood from concrete floors. I stopped in front of the bakery. The window display had a congratulatory cake. Congrats, Emily, Magnolia Humanitarian Finalist. I stood there staring at the frosting letters until someone tapped my shoulder. It was Mrs. Kroksick, my old biology teacher. Karen, she said, eyes widening. Back for the fundraiser. I blinked. What fundraiser? Oh, she said quickly. Emily's gala. She's hosting it at the club. Big announcement, I think. I nodded slowly. She hesitated. I always admired your strength, you know, she said. Even back then. I smiled. The kind that doesn't reach your eyes. Thank you. She left. I stayed. The gala. Of course. That night I tried to call Liam. Straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I wouldn't know what to say anymore. Instead, I opened my email. There it was. An old message from a Department of Defense account, dated 2 years ago. It was short. Karen, internal misfile has been corrected. Forwarding clearance reinstated. Thank you for your discretion. I remembered what it was about. An incident in Port-au-Prince. A civilian convoy misreport. I'd taken the fall quietly so the unit could keep operating. That's what leadership looked like sometimes. No applause. No plaques. Just survival. The next day I went to the bookstore my father still ran. It was my idea to buy it for him once when I was still married. He said it gave him purpose in retirement. The bell above the door jingled the same way it had when I was 16. Dust hung in the morning light. The same military novels lined the center table. Tom Clancy, Clive Cussler. And there on the wall behind the register, a photo of Emily and the mayor. I stared at it. Next to it was a smaller frame. A picture of me in uniform, no ribbons, no rank, cropped tight. I stepped closer. There was a plaque under it. Lieutenant K. Ford. Logistics Division. Logistics. I'd never been in logistics. I was med-ops. Field triage. Trauma command. My breath caught. Behind the counter my father appeared. Oh, he said. Didn't hear the bell. I didn't speak. I just pointed. That plaque, I said. He glanced at it, then adjusted a stack of receipts. Your mother thought it sounded softer, he said. You know how people get. I stared. Do I? He looked up then. She didn't want folks to ask about what you'd done. You know. In war. I laughed. Quiet, humorless. You mean what I survived? He didn't answer. I left with the picture in my hand. He didn't stop me. That evening, I sat on the motel bed staring at the photo. Then I opened my laptop. Typed Karen Whitmore, public record. The top result was a press release from Emily's nonprofit. It read, "We're proud of our roots from family legacy to civic duty." My sister's journey in uniform inspired my own path into service. Beneath it was a photo of her. In a tailored military-style blazer, wearing a replica ribbon. Smiling. I zoomed in. It was the same ribbon I'd earned during Operation Emberline. Except hers had no nameplate. No scratch from the blast that almost took my shoulder, just shine. I closed the laptop. Turned off the lamp. Saturday in the dark. I could still smell the dust of deployment. Still feel the sand in my socks. Still hear the crackle of comms in my ear. But none of that fit here. Not in this version of my life. Not in this town where I was a shadow and she was the light. That night I dreamed I was standing at a podium. But no one could hear me. My mouth moved. My hands shook. But the microphone was unplugged. And Emily stood in the front row clapping. The next morning I found the gala invitation. Folded into the community bulletin at the diner. Thick cardstock. Gilded edges. I held it in my hands for a long time. It read, "Celebrating those who serve," hosted by Emily Ford and Crane Foundation. Crane. The same donor who once sat on the Defense Advisory Board. The same man whose company had lobbied against field medical upgrades. I knew that name too well. His signature had once delayed a supply shipment that cost us 2 lives, And now he funded community renewal. I folded the card once, then again, slipped it into my coat pocket, walked out. I didn't plan to attend. But something in me whispered, "You're not done yet. Not with this town, not with her. Not with the story she'd wrapped herself in." I walked into the gala like I didn't belong there, because I didn't. The Magnolia Ridge Country Club hadn't changed. Same white columns. Same dark green carpet that swallowed your steps. Same waitstaff who didn't meet your eye unless they knew your last name meant something. I didn't check a coat. Didn't ask where I was sitting. I followed the soft sound of string music to the ballroom. The chandelier was grander than I remembered. Everything else was smaller. Emily stood near the stage wrapped in emerald silk laughing with a man in a navy suit I recognized from a Defense Committee article. Crane. Victor Crane. The man who'd once signed off on denying our trauma kits in the red zone. Now clinking glasses with my sister beneath a banner that read "From Service to Civic Light." I moved through the crowd quietly. No one noticed. Or they pretended not to. My seat was at table 14. Tucked beside the restroom corridor and a half-dead ficus plant. There were two people already seated. One was on her phone, the other was drinking something brown and strong. Neither looked up. I sat anyway. Across the room, Emily took the stage. A hush fell. She stood behind the podium like she'd trained for this. "I'm honored to stand here tonight," she began, not because of personal achievement, but because of legacy. I sipped my water. Flat. Warm. "My sister once served overseas," Emily continued, "but war is difficult, and not everyone finds the same way back." Some heads turned toward me, curious. Polite. No one said my name. I stared at her numb. "She inspired me," Emily said. "To stay. To lead here. To build something local. Real." The applause was instant. I didn't join in. I couldn't. I slipped away during dessert. The hallway outside the ballroom was quieter. Dimmer. Safer. Until I heard it. Two voices. Behind the catering door left slightly ajar. "She never questions anything," a woman whispered. "That's what makes it work." Then a man's voice. "If Crane needs backup, I still have that letter. The one she wrote about her squad mate." Silence. Then, "It makes her look unstable. Like she covered for misconduct." My stomach turned. There was only one letter they could mean. I wrote it in a hospital bed in Djibouti. Marcus was under review for violating chain of command during a civilian evac. He disobeyed a stand-down order to save a bus full of school children. I knew what it looked like on paper. But I also knew the truth. I wrote that letter so he wouldn't lose his career. So he could return home with honor. They'd twisted it, weaponized it. I backed away slowly. The carpet muffled my steps. Out the side exit. Down the service hallway. Into the night. I walked. No direction. Just distance. My motel room greeted me with silence and stale air. I pulled out the old deployment trunk. Pried open the lock. Pushed aside the layers of folded uniforms and field reports. There it was. The original letter. Marcus's name in bold. My handwriting clean but rushed. Page 2 still smelled faintly of antiseptic. I reread every word. There was nothing unstable in it, nothing disloyal. But I could see how someone like Crane, someone looking to smear, could edit the phrasing just enough. Enough to cast doubt. I found the pin next. Tucked inside a velvet pouch. A gold eagle, polished but worn. Marcus gave it to me before that last mission. "You're the one who'll do the right thing," he said, "even if it costs you." I closed my hand around it, felt the weight settle into my palm. And then I whispered, not to the room, not even to myself, "To hell with silence." The next day I found Harrow. Colonel John Harrow. He was in town for the same summit Emily's gala fed into. He didn't ask questions when I called. We met at a diner off Highway 40. No press. No flag pins. No small talk. Just two veterans in a cracked booth drinking burnt coffee. I slid the letter across the table. The original, I said. Unedited. He scanned it. Didn't blink. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small drive. Laurel Oak tonight, he said. National Veterans Event. I'm speaking. You'll want to be there. I nodded, but said nothing. Not yet. That evening, I walked into Laurel Oak wearing civilian black. No medals, no insignia. Just clean lines, a steady spine, and the truth folded in my inside pocket. The room was full. Chatter swirled, news crews, delegates, politicians. Emily was center stage again. This time in navy. Hair curled just right, eyes shining under the spotlights. I stayed in the back, invisible again. Until the doors opened. And Harrow walked in, followed by a line of silent figures in civilian clothes. Soldiers. Real ones. He moved toward me with purpose. Stopped, turned, saluted. Welcome back, Commander Whitmore. And then he faced the crowd. For those unfamiliar, he said, this is the officer who led Operation Emberline, who turned down a promotion to protect her team's integrity, who refused to let a man's life be buried under bureaucracy. Emily froze mid-breath. The audience did too. Harrow continued. She is also the person Crane tried to silence, to frame, to erase. A single camera flash lit up the room, then another, then a dozen more. In the front row, Crane's expression cracked. Emily stepped back. Just half a step. But it was enough. Harrow nodded once, then turned to me. You ready? And for the first time in a long time, I said yes. The applause didn't last long. It never does when the truth comes dressed in silence. By the time I stepped off that stage, the air had thinned. People looked at me differently. Not with awe, with recalculation. Like I was a variable they'd failed to account for. Emily avoided my eyes as I passed. Her hands clutched the hem of her blazer. Tight. White-knuckled. Crane had already disappeared, escorted, I suspected. Harrow was speaking with a military reporter, calm as ever, and I walked out into the night alone. The cold hit fast. Hard. Magnolia Ridge winters always arrived early. I kept walking, no destination, just steps. I passed the post office, then the old pharmacy. Then the corner where Liam learned to ride his bike. I hadn't thought about that in years. He scraped his knee once, falling into the mailbox post. He cried not from pain, but from embarrassment. I remember kneeling, cleaning his skin, whispering, "You're not weak. You're just learning." Now I wondered who was saying that to him. And if he believed them. Back at the motel, I reheated old coffee in the microwave. Bitter. Flat. But warm. I sat on the bed, still in the same black blouse, still holding the folded letter. I thought I'd feel victorious. I didn't. Just hollow. Justice isn't a finish line. It's just another doorway. At noon the next day, my phone buzzed. Blocked number. I hesitated, then answered. It was my mother. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. Emily isn't doing well, she said. I didn't reply. She didn't know. My mother added quickly. About the letter. About Crane. I exhaled slowly. She wore my ribbon, I said. She knew enough. A pause. Then she thought, if she looked like you, maybe she'd be taken seriously. I stared at the blank motel wall. Yellow paint. Tiny crack near the ceiling. She had the attention, I said flatly. I had the responsibility. Silence. You were always stronger than her, my mother whispered. It wasn't praise. It was fear. Later that afternoon, I checked my bank app. Account frozen. Error message. I called the hotline. Security review pending. Unusual flag. No access, no notice. I closed the screen calmly. Then called Harrow. They're pushing harder, he said, trying to smear. Or stall. He sounded tired, but not surprised. Crane has reach, he added, but not for long. That night, a new email landed in my inbox. No subject. No sender. Just a link. I clicked. It was a video. Low resolution. Deliberate in its cruelty. Images of me spliced from deployment footage. Taken out of context. Voiceovers not mine. Fake transcripts. Accusations layered over stills of Marcus bleeding out. A headline, "The Coward Commander," and below it a quote, from Emily, old, but still hers. Sometimes surviving doesn't make you brave. Sometimes it just means you ran faster. It had been posted years ago, part of a personal blog series she did on resilience. Now weaponized. Reposted across forums. Veterans groups. Comments brutal. Desk jockey, fake soldier. Even her sister says she cracked. I closed the laptop gently. As if slamming, it might break me more. I stood. Found the old eagle pin again, held it between both palms. It felt heavy, but grounding. Out there Marcus had taken shrapnel beside me. Here it was digital fire, same war. Different battlefield, I didn't cry. Not when the headlines hit. Not when they froze my account. Not when my mother asked me to ease up for the family's sake. But now in a motel room that smelled of bleach and cheap soap, I felt something break. Not loud, not messy. Just final. The next morning I wrote a single sentence on a sealed envelope. For truth, not glory. I addressed it to a local journalist I remembered from the gala, Nolan Graves. I included the original letter. The full report. A transcript of Harrow's remarks. A photo of Marcus smiling. Then I mailed it. No tracking, no signature. Just sent. Because sometimes you don't win by shouting, you win by planting the seed and walking away. I woke before sunrise. The motel air was stale, but the quiet helped. I sat at the tiny table by the window boots on pen in hand. The letter from Marcus lay open in front of me. His words clear, direct. Scrawled in thick black ink. If anything happens to me, he'd written, check the eagle pin. I hid something there for you. I turned it over. Felt along the back edges grooves. Then I found it. A seam I'd never noticed. I took my army issue penknife, slid it beneath the edge. A faint click. Inside, wedged tight in the hollow, was a micro SD card. No bigger than my thumbnail. I stared at it for a long moment, then slotted it into my laptop. One folder. Labeled Dustline, Confidential. 3 audio files. I clicked the first. A man's voice. Calm, practiced. The manifest says medical supplies. You and I both know those crates are loaded with intercept-grade ordnance. Move it out before UN sweep. No questions. Another voice followed. One I knew by heart. Marcus. Angry. Sharp. Shaken. You can't run weapons through a shelter zone. There are women and kids in that camp. Silence. Then a distant bang, metal on metal. End of file. The second file was worse. More threats. More denials. And Marcus pushing. Getting closer. The third file broke me. It was his voice alone. If I go missing, if they say it was an accident, tell Ford. She'll know what to do. My hands trembled, not from fear, from clarity. By noon I'd transcribed every word. Saved the files on 2 drives, one to send, one to carry. I printed hard copies. Marked timestamps. Labeled them chain of custody, non-classified evidence. I placed them inside a padded envelope. Wrote one line on the flap, this isn't about revenge. This is about the cost of silence. Then I sealed it. I booked a last-minute train ticket to DC. The National Veterans Summit was in 3 days. I wasn't on the speaker list. But I didn't need a podium to speak. I just needed the truth and a microphone. Before I left town, I stopped by City Hall. The receptionist greeted me like any other civilian. She didn't recognize me. I glanced at the open folders scattered across her desk. One caught my eye. Crane Group Proposal. Veterans Resource Center Initiative. I raised an eyebrow. The title page had Emily's name listed under Advisory Board, Community Liaison. The irony tasted bitter. I asked to speak with the mayor. I was told he was in a meeting. I sat anyway. Waited. After 20 minutes they let me in. His office smelled like new leather and lemon polish. He motioned to a seat. I read the file Nolan Graves sent, he said carefully. The audio, the transcript, troubling. I stayed quiet. He continued, your involvement complicates matters. You've become something of a lightning rod. My voice was low, even. Truth tends to do that. He looked uncomfortable. There are donors. Legacy funds. They feel your presence might polarize the initiative. Then came the final twist of the knife. We've also been in talks with Emily. Her image is more public-friendly. I didn't flinch. Just leaned forward. Do you know who Victor Crane is? He hesitated. Do you know what he did in Fallujah? I pressed. Do you know that I have his voice on tape ordering weapons into shelter zones? Silence. His jaw clenched. I didn't come here for approval, I said. I came here to make sure you understand what you're supporting. Then I stood. Walked out. Didn't wait for a response. Outside the sky was wide and blue. Magnolia Ridge looked like it always had. Too clean. Too curated. Like someone repainted the past and hoped no one would ask for the original. I stopped by the cemetery on my way out. Found Marcus's headstone near the far edge shaded by pine. I placed the eagle pin beside the engraving. Time to tell your story, I whispered. Then turned toward the gate. On the train, I didn't sleep. I watched the fields blur past. Felt the weight of the envelope inside my coat. At a rest stop, I received a call. Blocked number again. This time it was Emily. Her voice cracked. I didn't know they'd use it like that, she said. The letter. I thought it was just a background check. I didn't read the whole thing. She was crying. I didn't mean for them to hurt you. I listened. Let the silence stretch. Then answered softly. You didn't hurt me, you erased me. More silence. Then I just wanted Mom to see me. I paused. Felt something loosen in my chest. Being seen isn't the same as being real, I said. Then hung up. I arrived in D.C. the next morning. Gray skies. Flagpoles clattering in the wind. A city made of decisions. At the summit check-in, they asked for my badge. I handed over my military ID. The woman behind the desk blinked. General Whitmore, she said. Then quickly tapped a keyboard. We didn't expect you, but Colonel Harrow left instructions. She handed me a press pass. Reserved row. First 3, I nodded once. Didn't smile. The ballroom was massive. Screens lined the walls. Rows of chairs. Journalists already setting up. I sat quietly. Hands folded. Heart steady. The moderator announced a change in the program. Before our closing keynote, we invite one more voice, one who served not just in war, but in truth. And then I walked forward. Boots on polished wood, no ceremony. No rank. Just the story. My story. Ours. Some stories burn quietly, but they leave ash you can still choke on. Would you carry truth even if no one believed you? Have you ever had to fight for your name back inch by inch? Tell me below. I'm listening. I didn't have a speech. I had proof. I had pain. And I had a promise. As I stood before the microphone, I didn't feel powerful. I felt raw, but real. I adjusted the mic slightly, took one breath, and said, I used to think honor was something other people gave you. A pause. But war teaches you otherwise. Behind me, the projection screen lit up. Fallujah. Operation Emberline. Marcus kneeling beside a bloodied boy. My own body slumped against a makeshift wall uniform soaked in red. Blurred, brutal, undeniable. I spoke slowly. Clearly. Marcus Reed didn't die for a ribbon. He died because a man with money and influence prioritized power over people. A murmur swept through the crowd. I let it sit. I declined a promotion to protect Marcus from a false inquiry. I believed that truth would hold. I was wrong. Click. I played the first recording. Crane's voice cold detached talking about shipments. Then Marcus cutting in you can't run weapons through a shelter zone. Then silence. Then static. Then the truth. The final recording hit like a bullet. If I go missing, tell Ford. She'll know what to do. The room was silent, tight, breathless. Then a figure stepped forward from the front row. Military dress uniform. Ranked. A legal officer from the Department of Defense. She spoke into the second mic. We have verified this recording and confirm its authenticity. She turned to me. General Whitmore is not under investigation. She is a protected federal witness under current whistleblower statutes. A single gasp broke the air. Then more. A wave of stunned realization. Cameras flashed. Phones lifted. Not an attack this time, in acknowledgement. And yet I stayed still, because I wasn't done. I leaned back into the mic. There are people here who helped bury this. People who shared those photos, those doctored clips. People who doubted. I let my eyes scan the room. You don't owe me an apology. A pause. But you owe Marcus the truth. That was when they stood. First one. Then three. Then the whole hall. Not in applause, in quiet, solemn respect. And somewhere in the third row my mother stood too. Tears shining. My father didn't cry, but he placed his hand over his chest. For the first time, not out of duty, but understanding. Afterward, I stepped into the hallway. The air outside the ballroom was sharper, cooler. I found Colonel Harrow waiting near a service door, coffee in hand. He didn't say good job, he didn't need to. He handed me a thumb drive. I want you to have everything we pulled, he said. We're turning this over to federal. I nodded. There's one more thing, I said. He raised an eyebrow. I want to build something real. Something Marcus would have believed in. He smiled. You already have. 2 days later, Crane's name was on every major outlet. Fallujah cover-up exposed. General Whitmore's testimony confirms illegal arms deal. By Friday morning, Crane was in custody, handcuffed in front of his estate, flanked by federal agents. Emily. She vanished from public for a while. Her foundation's website quietly went offline. Her last post, a photo of her standing at a podium, caption leading with heart. The comments were shut down. I returned to Magnolia Ridge under an overcast sky. The air smelled like rain and rusted mailboxes. My parents asked me to come by. The living room looked the same. Stale couch. Crooked lamp. Family photos on the sideboard. Except, one was missing. The old logistics division frame had been taken down. My father handed me what was left. A torn plaque. A silent apology. I didn't stand with you, he said, but now I see it's that courage that kept you standing. He didn't hug me, but he didn't look away either. That was enough. Later, I found Emily in her office. Lights off. Boxes half packed. She didn't pretend to smile, just looked up. I lost everything, she said. I leaned against the doorframe. You never had it. You borrowed it. She looked down. I just wanted people to see me the way they saw you. I exhaled. You didn't have to steal to be seen. She reached for a file, hesitated. They're launching a federal review of the grant money. If there's jail time, You'll face it, I said. Not coldly, just fact. She nodded. Didn't cry, didn't plead. Maybe that was growth. Maybe it was fear. Either way, I walked out without looking back. At Marcus's grave, I found a small girl. 8, maybe 9. She held a daisy in one hand. Her mother stood beside her, quiet. She knows who you are, the woman said. She calls you the one who speaks for Daddy. I knelt. Placed a laminated copy of Marcus's commendation at the base. Then I turned to the girl. Would you like to visit me sometime, I asked. A place where no one forgets who you love, she nodded. Didn't need convincing. 2 months later, the town broke ground on a new building. On the edge of Magnolia Ridge, near the old post office, the Marcus Reed Veterans Resource Center opened with no parade, no big speeches. Just community. And clarity. The glass plaque at the front read, "In honor of truth service and second chances." Inside, a case held Marcus's eagle pin. Polished. Still whole. Next to it, a framed photo of me smeared in dust, arms around a wounded boy pulling him from rubble. Below it, one line: honor doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be real. The day the ribbon was cut, it rained softly. Not enough to cancel the event, just enough to make umbrellas bloom like quiet flags across the courtyard. I stood at the front in uniform, the same one I wore the night they pinned my field command badge. Not for show, but for memory. Beside me, Lily held a framed photo of her father Marcus in full gear, half grin crooked under a battered helmet. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Behind us, the small crowd stirred gently under gray skies. Veterans, local nurses, a few city officials who suddenly remembered my name. And in the back row, Emily. No spotlight, no press pass. Just a white blouse, black pants, and a silence I hadn't seen from her before. She didn't wave. But she didn't leave. I stepped up to the podium. No speech this time either, just a truth I was ready to carry aloud. This center isn't built from victory. It's built from the lives that were nearly forgotten. A pause. For every veteran who returned to a home that didn't understand them. For every woman who served and was told to stay quiet. And for every man who died defending a truth no one believed until now. I stepped back. Let the words hang. Let them echo not just in the ears of the crowd but in the walls behind me. The building didn't shine. It didn't tower. But it stood with dignity. A new place. A clean place. One that couldn't be rewritten. Inside the front hall, a glass case displayed the centerpiece. Marcus's eagle pin. Next to it, a blown-up image of the mission. Me dragging a boy from the rubble, both of us covered in ash and sweat, and something more permanent: conviction. Below it, one simple line in bold serif font: proof of survival. A promise not to forget. After the ceremony, I sat on the bench by the main gate. Rain had stopped. Only mist hung now. Lily ran across the pavement with two other kids, laughing, chasing drops with paper flags. I watched them quietly. Emily approached. Not from the spotlight this time, but from the side. She sat beside me. Didn't speak for a long while. Then, thank you for not leaving me behind. I didn't look at her. You pulled yourself out, I said. That matters more. She nodded. Eyes rimmed red but clear. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she added. Good, I said. Because I'm not giving it. She flinched just a little. But I softened my voice. Forgiveness is about release. Not approval. Another pause. Then I added, I've already let it go. But that's mine, not yours. Emily looked down, her hands twisted in her lap. She didn't apologize again. That was enough. Back at my apartment, the inbox was full. Letters, invitations. Requests to speak. I declined most. I wasn't interested in being a symbol, but one message stood out. Subject: from a Marine mom. The body read, my son served with Marcus. He never talked about what happened, but after your speech, he told me everything. Thank you for giving us the words we didn't know we needed. I sat with that message for a long time. Then I printed it, folded it once, tucked it beside the original letter from Marcus. The one he wrote in a hospital bed. The one I nearly let the world twist. That night I walked through town just after dusk. The windows glowed warm behind curtains. The sidewalks glistened faintly from the mist. At the bookstore, the new display featured a local section. Veteran authors. Community leaders. In the center, someone had added a copy of Command in Chaos Lessons from the front line. My name printed clearly on the cover. Not a bestseller. Not even professionally published, but real. Credited, untouched by PR. Next to it, a small sign, our own commander, Karen Whitmore. I stepped out into the cool air. Past the park. The elementary school. The edge of town where Marcus's parents still lived. Then toward the grave again. This time Lily met me at the gate. She didn't speak. Just handed me a drawing. A girl in uniform. Hair pulled back tight. Beside her, a boy with a daisy. At the top, scrawled in bold letters, the lady who tells the truth. I blinked fast, then knelt. Do you know what legacy means? I asked. She shrugged. Number. It means I said that even when I'm gone, you'll still know what's real. She smiled, folded the drawing gently, then ran back to her mother. And I stood still in the softening dark. Breath slow. Shoulders light. Not because the war was over, but because I'd chosen to carry the truth, not the shame. And that changed everything. Some mornings I still wake before the sun, not from nightmares. Just habit. The silence isn't sharp anymore. It's wide. Like an open field after the snow melts. In the new house, the first I've ever owned on my own, the kitchen smells like strong coffee and old cedar. Marcus's metal case sits on the shelf by the window. Next to it, Lily's drawing. She taped it up herself. Sometimes she hums when she's coloring. And when she does, the whole space feels warmer. Not loud, just full. Liam called last week. Not long. Just 10 minutes. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. He said I saw the video. Then I'm proud. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe it. We're taking it slow. Emails, phone calls, maybe a visit. But slow doesn't mean broken. Sometimes healing takes the same path as pain, just in the opposite direction. The Veterans Resource Center is busier than I ever imagined. There's a reading group now. 3 women in their 50s, all former medics, meet every Thursday. They bring brownies and iced coffee. Talk about deployments and divorce like they belong in the same sentence. They always invite me. I join sometimes. Not as general, not as whistleblower, just Karen. Just another woman who survived something no one else saw and made a choice not to disappear. Last month, Emily sent a letter. No return address. No signature inside, just a pressed daisy. And one line written in looping script: legacy is heavier than applause. I finally understand that. I placed it next to the folder that holds Marcus's original letter. 2 different stories. 1 lesson. Lily's learning how to ride a bike now. Same age Liam was when he scraped his knee on that metal mailbox post. The other day, she fell hard on the gravel. She looked up at me, lip trembling. But she didn't cry. I'm not weak, she said. I'm just learning. And in that second, I swear it felt like the circle had closed. Not with fireworks, not with speeches, but with truth passed down hand to hand like a compass no one else can steal. The center recently added a new plaque near the entrance. Visitors run their fingers across it sometimes. It reads, "Founded by Major General Karen Whitmore." Not to shine, but to keep the light burning for those still finding their way. I didn't write it, but I approved every word. Some stories end in silence. But mine ends in something softer than noise. A kitchen light left on. A girl with a daisy. A name returned to where it always belonged. And a voice finally used not to defend but to build. As the seasons turn, I've learned this: justice doesn't always roar, but it echoes. And when told truthfully, it lives longer than shame ever could. If you've ever carried a story no one believed, I hope this one helped you breathe. If you've ever been erased, silenced, or sidelined, you are not alone. Some of us come back quietly, but we come back stronger. Share your story below. You never know who needs to hear it. You never know who might heal because you dared to speak. Subscribe to EN Reddit Story for more real stories of quiet justice, healing, and emotional empowerment after 40. Your voice matters. And your story isn't over yet.